In the past year, our lives have changed dramatically. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected every area of our lives, including mental health. Though we're starting to see the light at the end of the pandemic tunnel, many experts are concerned about the long-term impacts of this mental health crisis. To address this important topic, the Florida Conference Communication and Public Relations team brought together a panel of experts to discuss the current realities and provide resources, strategies, and support. To read the article that accompanies this video, check out the Spring 2021 issue of Florida Focus magazine or go to floridaconference.com/FloridaFocus.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for taking this opportunity to share with us today from the perspectives of the work you do, the ministry you do, the people you love and care about, and to have this conversation. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like, let's just randomly share what you do and how you're involved in the community. So, Tim, would you start us out, though?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Cook, and I'm with Advent Health Altamont. I'm the CEO there, and part of our ministry is outside a hospital, so we deal with lots of the ancillary professionals. We have a very new partnership with the Seminole County and Seminole County Sheriff's called the Hope and Healing Center that's dealing with addiction and all the challenges with that. So it's an exciting and important ministry for the whole people, all the people in Seminole County.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Candy.
My name is Candy DeVore, and I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I serve on the pastoral staff at the Forest Lake Church. And so I have the privilege of being our counseling coordinator. That means that I not only see a variety of individuals, couples, and families in therapy, but also coordinate any support groups that we have going on, such as Grief Share, Divorce Care, and we currently have an anxiety group that came out of the pandemic and the need for people to be able to talk about what's going on. So I'm very privileged to be able to do that and very grateful to be here. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Very good. Dr. Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andrea Takor. I'm the clinical director of a local private practice, Phoenix Counseling. We have a staff of 3 of us, and
All right.
pass it off to them.
Okay. Looks like you're up next.
Yeah. My name is Justin Kennard. I'm a registered intern mental health counselor. Andrea is my wife. And I guess people want to always know what you specialize in. And it's turned into really working with men through father wounds and understanding how to communicate in a marriage. And
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Christian Taylor. I am the senior chaplain at Advent Health Orlando, and I've also been working in oncology for the last 5 years specifically. But more recently, definitely because of the pandemic, been doing a lot of supporting our team members and just trying to help them with the stresses that come along with working under a COVID environment.
Yeah. Wow, it's a lot. Thank you.
And I'm Myra Rodriguez. I have worked as a school psychologist and also as an associate superintendent for the schools in Florida Conference. So my job has been to support teachers and students from the educational end and from the social, emotional, and mental health end. I've been there since 1990, so it's been quite a while, and it's been quite a journey. I just had the opportunity to retire this past year, but I have come back. You never quite fully retire.
No.
So I am retired and retreaded and back part-time.
Yeah. We'll keep you close.
Absolutely.
It's a privilege to be friends today, talking about health and mental health. Let's get started. On this first question I'd like to explore with you, I'd like actually each of you to respond to from the perspective of the ministry or the work that you do. So here's how it sounds. Considering your role as a community leader or healthcare provider or mental health provider, in what ways Or what observations have you made about mental health that may have changed in the past 12 months?
Probably, as I spoke before, needing a support group for anxiety. For me, the increase in people not recognizing that they're anxious and not recognizing that it's actually connected to the pandemic, wondering what's wrong with me. Yeah. So for me, it has had a big impact in enhancing anxiety and given a great opportunity to share tools to help people understand that our happiness is not connected to the situation, but it's connected to how we manage it and what we do from there. So that's something that I have really seen over the past 12 months that's been very prevalent.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I think it makes me think of something that I've noticed is that I think we can all agree, most of us, depending on our different backgrounds, that our culture, our society really functions in a lot of dysfunctional ways. People, find ways to kind of cope and push themselves past their limits. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I've observed in the past 12 months is that all of those things were no longer effective. And people were beginning to realize, whether it was relational issues or their anxiety or their work schedule, whatever it was, it's just been this great unveiling of just issues that, they could no longer cover. So I think that's been my big observation.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would agree.
I think too, I guess we got a little thing going here is
Let it go.
my big thing has always, it's really been about learning to slow down. I think this pandemic has pressed people to slow down, but I think in our nation, we're so used to like a breakneck speed of meetings and go, and bringing the kids to baseball, soccer, and this and that. And I think a lot of us have lost the ability to understand what it means to slow down and kind of getting your point of understanding. I had to take a step back so that I can acknowledge I am anxious or I am not really in a great place, which is then influencing maybe the family or my marriage or my job. And a big thing for me has been really helping people slow their life down and engage things so that, it can be as healthy a situation as possible. And I had another thought, but it flew the coop. So
It'll come back.
Yeah, we're teaching people how to breathe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dichotomy, and Krish can speak to this too. While much of the world was going through that forced slowdown, there was a big bubble of the world that was on hyper overdrive.
Exactly.
And what you saw in the healthcare world were people that were getting pushed really to the max because of bubbles all over the country. People were getting pulled and incented because of great salary opportunities, and so staffing was a constant challenge. People were having to accept responsibility for being the communicator between a patient and their family at times that they never played that role. And so it put a lot of pressure on them. I'll never forget one nurse in tears telling me that her daughter, I just remember this now, her daughter asked her every day, "Mommy, are you okay? Are you okay?" So every day she came home, this nurse had to explain to her daughter that she was okay. And yet this bold and brave nurse every day would get up knowing the angst this was creating in her family and then show up the next day. And if you remember, back in the early part of this, we were talking about this earlier, we had all these people who know everything who didn't know anything. That in itself was a stressor.
Major paradigm shift.
Yeah, you've got physicians who we all look to for answers. You've got government leaders who we all look to for answers, and they didn't have them. And think about the anxiety this caused in our country when people you trusted to give answers didn't have them, or the one that they gave you 3 weeks later was different than the one they gave you before. And this hyper-politicization of this whole issue created a whole nother layer of angst and distrust. Who do you trust in a pandemic if you can't trust your medical professionals? So it was, I think as the purpose of this discussion is, I think for years this will slowly unfold as people reflect and see what it created in relationships and in their own personal angst and in their own personal health, because all that tension and stress has put a great deal of stress on the physical body as well. So it's one of those things that we'll be learning about, for years, and how in this country we've not had something like this for a bazillion years. So it's really going to be an interesting, and it's going to be something that I think we will benefit from it, because it's created an awareness like nothing has in our country for a long time.
Wow, thank you very much. Good.
I was going to say, from the educational perspective,
Oh my word.
This has just been a warp speed ride for everyone involved. At the beginning of the pandemic, we suddenly stopped everything, and virtually overnight, we asked teachers to revamp how they were doing things and learn technology that none of them had really used before, and learn to teach online virtually overnight. Now, learning how to teach a subject online is one thing. Learning the technology is a secondary thing, item to that. But then learning how to actually engage students in a very different format than when you have them sitting in front of you was altogether a new experience for everyone. They gradually got really excellent at learning how to do that. Although many of them told me, I have never worked this hard in my entire life. They were not just teaching online, which was short periods of time, but then they were spending all this time trying to prepare and, have support materials to send out to parents and to print those support materials, or to find ways of putting those support materials online for students. So all of this just created a plethora of stuff that had to be done. So talk about, I don't think in the educational world anyone slowed down. It was just virtually impossible. Then came the summer and everyone just kind of relaxed, but they were anxious, about what was to come in the fall. And then the fall hit, and our worst nightmare came true. It was all going to continue, except for the fact that they knew how to teach students in person. They had learned how to teach students online, but now in the fall, we asked them to do both at the same time, and so that created a lot of new situations once again. So when we talk about anxiety and when we talk about how to best help students, because teachers for the most part are very conscientious. They're not into it for the money. They're into it because they want to help kids. And so many of them have had conversations with me that, coming back to something that one of us said a little earlier, which was the cracks that were in the armor were exposed even more during this entire thing, be it for teachers or for students and their families, for the greater support system of the school system. In essence, if you had a family situation where there was already stressors in that family, now all of a sudden everyone is out of their normal routines. Mom and dad are working from home, and so all of a sudden Mary and Susie are also going to school at home, and that has created a different system than what normally families would have been dealing with. They were, in dysfunctional situations, you were probably keeping your coping systems at bay, and had learned how to manage certain things. But now all of a sudden everyone gets put together in a working environment. And that in and of itself created more stressors than anyone anticipated. So I've had teachers saying to me, how do I teach somebody that, keeps getting up and walking around? And it really isn't, how can I, if they were in the classroom, I would know what to do, but I can't control the environment at home. So all of it has been, I would say, stressors put on steroids. for
good
our
point.
families.
Wow.
And so from a student perspectives, the students have, I mean, all of us have referred to a sense of isolation. And depending upon how old these kids are, your different developmental periods, being with your peer group is ultimately very important in certain developmental stages. So I think that our middle school students, our high school students have been impacted a lot by the social isolation that they have experienced.
Myra, President Machado and I visited 2 schools this past week,
Yes.
East Pasco and North Tampa Christian Academy.
Yes.
And at East Pasco, one of the teachers there named Melissa was telling us about how she normally would prepare on a Sunday 2 to 3 hours just to get ahead of the week. But now she's at 5 hours as a result. And I can only imagine the collateral stuff that happens in homes in so many different ways. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Let's continue on. Christian, thank you.
So really one of the big things that comes to mind when you ask that question is I've noticed a shared ownership about mental health that may previously wasn't as potent or present, in the sense that with everybody being so stressed and high anxiety, there was just a lot more understanding that we all own this responsibility to take care of mental health, not just for ourselves, but for others. And so I've seen a lot more collaboration around those that theme, and just this need to work together to find ways and come up with solutions that we never had to really think about, or maybe we had to, it wasn't the big thing. And so now it seems like everybody has to own a piece and do something and try to help find some solutions.
Very good.
Yeah. As we're talking about this with this, there are several things about teachers that I've had some conversations too. Your comment about spending 5 hours, she's spending 5 hours and she probably feels less satisfied and fulfilled in that preparation than she did in her 2 hours. That's what we've found is a lot of teachers are just don't feel good about what they're doing. I mean, they're pouring themselves into it, but trying to manage all those variables. Is that what you're hearing?
Yes.
It's a very I mean, they put extra time in, but they're not able to teach and perform and see the performance of the children the way that really fills up a teacher. And that's very disconcerting in these folks.
In many ways, it's like grieving. Because you're putting your heart and soul into something, and you're not seeing the amount of benefit for the students. And that's that intrinsic benefit that really fills the needs tank of a teacher.
It helps you get through the bumps and the
Right.
The other thing that's really difficult in this discussion is the statistics bear out everything we're talking about. I mean, the incidence of drug overdoses and deaths from overdose has dramatically increased during 2020.
Domestic violence.
Suicide.
Child abuse is an interesting thing with the schools, because when a normal school is in session and the majority of the children are there, the teachers actually become a safety net, because they observe behavior and they see things. Now with lots of kids and families at home and tensions rising, it is a very difficult. The data really bears out that this is a much bigger thing than just some people feeling anxious and depressed. I mean, there's a lot of, to your point about the cracks. We already all were people and wounded and broken and struggling with this, and now this pressure has just really, really broke those wounds open, and they're being expressed in a lot of unhealthy ways. As Christian said, I think one of the real positives is the awareness of people is significantly heightened. Employers are starting to put resources in this. Local governments are realizing, my goodness, we have not provided support systems like we should. So I think coming out of this, there is some opportunity to see some improvement, but it really has laid us bare.
Christian and Tim, both in the healthcare environment, have something to share with regards to the fact that people can't visit their family.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
I wonder if you would both speak to that side of that issue, and that maybe Candy, Andrea, and Myra could speak to the other side of the issue of families that are struggling because they can't see their loved ones. Guys, if you could lead us
Christian
first.
probably has more significant stories. I'll just tell you, it's been very, very difficult. Many families understand intellectually that that was an important thing to do, but and we've made exceptions. We've made a lot of exceptions for families who are in the end stage, but it's been very, very difficult on staff to have to be the go-between in that moment. They might have been onlookers right before. Now they're actually go-betweens.
Yeah.
So but there's some amazing stories, both from the family standpoint and the staff. But it's been nothing that, it's like a teacher we're talking about. A nurse never prepares to have to be the intermediary between a dying father and their son. Who prepares you for that?
Yeah.
Nobody.
And then who ministers to that nurse?
Well, and Christian can tell you all kinds of stories. But I think it's been one of those interesting things where intellectually people get it, but emotionally it's really difficult.
Tim, my wife traveled to Pennsylvania recently to care for her mother who had surgery, was in the hospital, and then in a care facility. That we're talking 10-degree weather. And the only contact she could have was waving through a window outside.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's the deal, right? So you're seeing this on the floor, I'm sure.
Definitely so, and just the value of togetherness has never been so much more appreciated because of those many family members who are not able to be in there with their loved one. I think some of the hardest ones, like you said, there's a lot of stories, but I'll just tell you some of the hardest ones have been the compounded deaths within a family. So where we would have multiple family members on the same floor.
Wow.
Only doors apart.
Wow.
And they don't know
Oh my.
that their loved one is a few doors down, and that's hard. It's really, really difficult for the care team as well, but definitely also for those family members who have lost multiple family members within the span of a month and a half. And then still, like you said, we've made exceptions to really try to help support in these ways, but for some, they just can't not being there, and for many, no amount of understanding for why it has to be this way still really helps, because you just want to be there for your loved one.
Wow.
You know,
Thank you.
when you think about it, and we all know the updates of the daily statistics. I think the last one being, 500,000. We've reached the 500,000 death. And I was thinking the other day, well, behind every one of those numbers is a family. So if it's grandma or grandpa or mom or dad or, behind each one of those deaths are probably children, grandchildren, that all are out working and that have individual lives. So as we were talking about before, all of the COVID-19 stressors that have made us more aware of cracks in the armor, so to speak, as we alluded to before, that's the first layer of it. The second layer is grieving if you happen to be one of those families that has had a devastating loss. And as you alluded to, in some families, more than one. I can't, but we've encountered situations where teachers 1 week will say, oh, I lost so-and-so in my family. And then 2 weeks later, oh, I lost another so-and-so. So coupled with those losses, then you add in the added stressors of all these changes in their job, and hence the mental health difficulty, because we know, from a mental health perspective, that we are all wired to handle a certain amount of stress. But when it gets to be so overwhelming that, our adrenaline system is going nonstop, then that's when the mental health breakdown occurs.
Crisis, yeah.
And for children, I would just add in a plug here, they don't know how to put that into words.
Right. Yeah.
Adults are more verbal and can at least, display the angst that they're feeling or tell you about it. And that in and of itself is therapeutic. But children will just show you. They'll display it through their actions, and sometimes those actions can be misinterpreted by the adults in their world as being obstinate or being difficult or being,
Acting out even?
acting out, whereas they are, what they're showing you is their frustration. And they don't know how to tell
fear,
you
maybe?
that their world is
fear.
frustrated, has become unpredictable, unsafe,
Yep.
and they don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. The adults are struggling to figure out how to say it.
Yes.
I think this really resonates with me because grief is one of my specialties, has been for a number of years. And so that has been, everything that you brought up has been heavy on my heart this whole time. And I think as I've worked with clients, the thing that I really try to focus on is kind of the grief work that I've always taught people, and that is to acknowledge that you've been robbed of the opportunity to be with your loved one. And we understand all of the logical reasons why that had to be so, but let's sit and just honor the fact that this is a significant loss on top of loss. And that has to be honored and acknowledged. I think sometimes we're so in a hurry to sort of explain away, well, this is how it has to be, and and so on. And so I really work with my clients to sit with the reality, because if we don't do that now, it's going to come back and sort of haunt you later. And so I think acknowledging and honoring those additional layers of losses, talking about how it's affecting you, how it's changing your grief versus how grief might normally look in regular times, expressing the hurt and the fear and the anger, that's so important.
Andrea, thank you for mentioning grief. I'm wondering, are there layers of grief, like what a family goes through? I mean, an individual or a family, or maybe a community, or maybe a school.
That's such an excellent.
Or maybe a church, or a community group. I'd even go so far as to say, is there grieving as a nation?
Most definitely.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that you see in scripture and that I love, and I've talked about with my clients of faith, is really looking at the beautiful examples of community or even national grieving, coming together and acknowledging the losses. And we haven't even mentioned, in our discussion so far, just the losses that people have experienced at the same time as the pandemic in terms of, social, racial, dynamics that have been going on at the very same time. And so we have this this community subset of the community that is processing
profound stress,
an additional layer of loss and stress and fear, just abject fear and feeling unsafe. So I think that community, the collective, the national grieving, finding ways to come together and do that would be such a healing. And this is where the church can be a huge part, a huge facilitator, I think, in that. So.
One of the things I've noticed several months ago, Tim, you can talk to us about this if you will, and it was such a cool thing that people from the community lined up in hundreds of cars driving past some healthcare institutions and waving banners and signs. And we love you, beautiful statements. At the same time, I mean, that's we got to keep you guys going kind of a thing, right, Christian? Right, we need you guys. At the same time, there's a whole subset, as you mentioned, grieving, seriously grieving.
That's interesting, Tim, because we saw quite a phenomenon if we look now back over a full year. So if you remember the news, the first spike, March 8th, this time about a year ago, and frankly, it wasn't nearly as bad as we just had, but we didn't know because that was the first time. And if you look at many of our hospitals, you will see during that March to June time, the community just could not do enough for the hospitals. They were parading. There were churches. We had a Muslim temple come out and do a service for us in the parking lot with horns honking. It was amazing. I mean, it was really. It's amazing how tragedy can unify people. So then, if you remember, the summer came, things went down. People, this is awesome, moving back to normality. And then when the second really difficult time happened, post-holiday, we didn't see any of that. Now, I'm not saying that as a complaint. I'm saying it as, I think, a symptom or an expression of people were in grief mode. They didn't have the energy to cheer on the people. They were cheering for it, the healthcare community. They didn't have the energy anymore. They were emotionally exhausted. And it was, especially when you look at it, Christian, I don't know if you remember, but there were weeks where none of us ate anything but food from restaurants because restaurants didn't have anything to do, and they would just bring truckloads of food to the hospital to feed the staff out of gratitude. That did not happen almost at all in the second wave. And I think it goes back to this period of where this thing has gone on and the waves have just zapped people's ability to think about it. And I want to just say one thing, because I think you made a really important point about the church, because the church has been going through its own loss. I mean, people who loved Sabbath worship have had to figure out a different way. And I'll tell you, Tim, I had a local pastor, tell me the other day, he said, Tim, we realized this during, and they probably, from the healthcare community, probably pushed the limit.
I need to shift our focus, though. But we need to talk about something else, because, there's a saying, kids are resilient. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. And I want to touch on that with you for our audience's sake, our readers' sake, because there are families that are scratching their heads how to care for their children. And more importantly, maybe, what are the signs that parents and maybe our educators and community leaders, church leaders, what are the signs that they would do well to recognize that here's a child that might be in crisis?
Yeah, I think you mentioned already a bunch of it is, as a relational therapist, it's also does go back to the parents. To go back to the very beginning of our talk, can you slow down enough to recognize where you are right now in the midst of a world that's going on? Because kind of again, going back to a national thought process, we're so used to stories wrapping up in a week, a month if it's very big, Like, think about athletes who maybe they get in trouble or something happens. In a couple weeks, they've moved on. This has gone on now 12, 13 months. We're not used to this. So the parents are struggling. And it trickles down with the kids. And the kids, maybe they are acting out. Maybe they're not listening to you as much. They're being defiant. I don't want to shower today. You make the dish. I'm not cleaning the dishes. And we take this as disrespect, not realizing, wait a second, he or she hasn't seen their friends in weeks, or they haven't been able to play their sport or just engage the way they have. And I think, Andrew and I were talking yesterday, one of the other ones that gets usually missed is we look for the defiant acts, but we forget when Johnny or Sally withdraws. And we're like, thank you, Lord, that I got a quiet one. But we're not thinking, wait a second, that's just his or her way of dealing, and it's not healthy because they can go in their own dark place and feel even more alone and isolated because we're not acknowledging them. We're just thankful they're quiet, and we're not questioning, wait a second, are you okay? Let's go for a walk or whatever.
Wow, powerful. Thank you.
So I would like to interject here that when we think about children, it makes a huge difference as to where they are in the developmental stage process. Young children are very different than older children. So as we think about young children, for example, and one of the questions you asked is, what are the signs for parents and teachers? I would say the biggest one to watch out for is a big change a big change in mood or behavior, perhaps things that maybe this child enjoyed before and would be, right there to do and participate in, that all of a sudden they become apathetic about it, not that excited, or they just seem to be, not really excited about anything in their life anymore. For younger children generally, and through this pandemic, and that's still consistent, they take their cues about life from the significant adults around them. So if they see significant adults around them that are stressed, that automatically transferred, through osmosis almost. They can pick it up in the vibes in the air, and then they become stressed. And again, those are the kids that are a lot less verbal, and so they are going to be showing you their stress level in how they act. As we move up in the developmental rung, child development rung, children that are middle school age are going to be very concerned about losing touch with friendships, because they have a very definite pecking order, when they are in school, and they maintain that pecking order in all kinds of different ways. And all of a sudden, even though many of them are back to school, and so forth, there are some that aren't. There are some that are still doing, Zoom meetings and so forth. So the pecking order has sort of been, has had to be redefined and so forth. And so again, those all create stressors. So the biggest thing for me that I tell teachers in signs of, what are some mental health signs that you need to watch for, is watch for big changes. I was down at a school the other day, and a teacher had asked me to, while I was visiting, to take a look at one particular child that she was very concerned about. And this child had done very well last year, even through the short time of, winding up the school year, teaching virtually. But she had done fairly well last year. This year, she has been lethargic, comes into school, puts her head down, isn't really, falls asleep in class the entire time. So I brought her out a little bit and just chatted with her to just kind of see where she was at, because those are not typical things that sometimes teachers do. But I tell teachers, when children give you a little bit of a door, walk through it, because they're inviting you into their world. So I sat and talked with this young girl. She's maybe 9 or 10, fourth grader. And as we talked a little bit, the thing that stood out in my mind is she had given up. This sense of hopelessness, and it wasn't necessarily something that anyone, either her teacher or her parent, was even picking up. She's just quiet in class. She's just falling asleep and can sometimes refuse to do things, but nothing earth-shattering. But in my talking with her, and asking her lots of questions about what she thought, what came out is she doesn't think that there's an end to this. For us as adults, we have historical experience that tells us that things in life come and go, and sometimes when we are in one of these difficult periods, we have to hang on, and we will get through it. We will see light on the other side. But for children, they don't have enough of those experiences behind them to think that that's true. And so that puts them in a cycle of helplessness and hopelessness that a lot of parents don't realize. So if I could speak with parents, it would be, have these conversations with your kids. Don't be afraid to have those conversations and to say, how are you really doing? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? Because parents assume that if there's not an earth-shattering event, that their kids are okay, when they're sometimes not.
Our children mirror our emotions. They absorb them and they reflect them back. And I want to point out the way that Myra framed those questions. How are you really feeling? She didn't say, are you okay?
Yeah.
Are you afraid? We have a tendency from our own fears to frame our questions in a way that reflects that same thing, you know.
So that they tell us what we want to hear.
Exactly. Well, or they ask for the first time, well, I wasn't before, but is there something to be afraid of? Maybe now I need to be afraid. Yes, Mommy, I don't know what I'm afraid of, but you've asked the question and I am. So Myra asked those so beautifully. And it's so important that we recognize that. The fears that we have, are we projecting them? And are we intensifying them by the questions that we're asking? Asking those questions of how are you really feeling? How did your day go? Not did you have a bad day? You know, did you have
those open-ended questions?
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, Raquel provided this question, and I wanted to aim it right there, and you already began to answer it.
Okay.
What are some ways to advocate for people that are struggling? And what are some things to say and not say?
Well, you know, that's certainly framing how you ask your questions. Asking people, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Is in our mind a really functional, good question, but in reality, we might be missing what needs to be asked instead. So paying attention to what we need to say to them. The other thing is that what you ask the things not to say. And God's got this. He's in control. Just have faith. These kind of questions, for some people, that's going to lead them to a deeper faith and searching in God. For other people, it's going to make them say, what's wrong with me that I don't have that faith? So I'm broken, and now I don't even have God.
Or for the cynical person, it says, well, you know, you and God may have it, but I don't. So
you know being very, very careful of the questions that we ask and making sure that we're asking questions that don't meet our needs. I'm afraid of how you're feeling, so I'm going to ask questions in a way that I can walk away and feel like I've taken care of it. Instead of asking the questions that are really going to give you the opportunity to share with me how you're feeling and what you're really going through.
This out there, my wife is a stay-at-home mom. And of course, before the pandemic, we have a 5-year-old son and a 2-year-old. And so for my 5-year-old, she, you know, we had planned to put him in school. Then the pandemic happened. And then, you know, she became mom and teacher specifically. And I think that brought on, and she's actually has her degree in elementary education, so she can do it. It's just that in a pandemic, it took on a different form. And she, you know, she really struggled with throughout certain points in the pandemic, you know, whether she was a good mom or not, because she couldn't take her kid out to the science center. She couldn't take them out to all these places where they could engage with people, other kids, and just develop that not only social, but just kind of emotional interaction with others. And so it was really, really difficult. And the hopelessness that was talked about for kids, she really felt herself. Knowing that at some point we get through the pandemic, but in the midst of it, we're never getting through the pandemic.
Exactly.
Something happened with the pandemic that made all of us raise our bar of expectation of what we could do astronomically high. And the mothers that were homeschooling now suddenly had to be the best homeschooler and the best mother and the best wife. The healthcare workers had to be the best healthcare workers. You know, as clinicians, we had to be the best at what we were doing to meet all the needs. So we were working crazy hours to do all that. And this is something, goes back to the very first question you asked about what was different. That's one of the things that I have seen across the board, helping people be able to step back. It's all about the step back and look at where you're setting that bar. You know, why are you having that level of expectation of what you can or can do now as opposed to times before? And it's been really interesting to watch.
Thank you.
I would also say things to avoid. You know, we call it silver lining. You know, we talk like, don't go with the, at least this didn't happen. You know, it's, and a lot of times people do that. And I, to be honest, work with a few pastors as, you know, and I tell them, I say, look, scripture is wonderful, but don't throw that at people because, and I tell them, I said, look what you're doing. Okay. You know, Johnny or Sally comes up to you and says, I got X, Y, and Z going on. And a lot of times people want to throw Philippians, oh, on prayer and supplication. You know, it's like, all you've done is create a distance. These people are asking in a time of a pandemic where we all want connection, community, and ties. When we give these responses, there's such a distance and, quite frankly, a bit of a coldness of like, I don't really want to engage you. And again, this sounds like a broken record, and that's okay. It's again, are you taking care of yourself enough so that when your friend, doesn't even have to be a work thing, when your friend, your neighbor, whoever, comes up to you and they are hurting, do you have a little bit of space left in your emotional tank to engage them? And we're not just throwing little things at them because we hope they go away and we're like, bring it to the Lord, you know. But it's really learning, like, again, slow down, take care of yourself. My wife and I, every month so far, we'll take 3 days. You know, we go away out in nature, we go camping. You know, it's a safe thing to do, gets us quiet, away from the screens. Find your ways to recharge, to take care of yourself so that you can, not just work, engage your kids, engage your neighbor. You know,
we have to continue to play.
Yeah.
Because we're alive, right?
Yeah.
You know, I can't help but wonder, Justin, if maybe God's promises are better at this time for us to claim individually rather than projecting them.
Correct.
For people who aren't ready for them.
It's a good thought.
You know, we have some questions from across Florida. The first comes from a nurse. Her name is Erica. She's 30 years old. And I'll just leave it open to whoever would like to respond. What are some ways that frontline workers can grieve appropriately and decompress appropriately, especially those caring for COVID-19 units?
Well, I'm going to let Christian handle this, but I would say, and I think it applies, I think presence is probably one of the things that when I look at a team who has to deal with this, nobody wants to be alone in that time, and nobody wants to hear a lot of flowery rhetoric. But when you're there with your teammate, just in the moment, I think God can use presence sometimes far more than words. And so I've seen that. I'm sure, Christian, you have too, where the nurses and the teams will come together and nobody really has any amazing thing to say, but they're there together in the moment, and that's powerful.
Wow.
I
Beautiful.
would echo that for sure. Grieve together with the same soldiers on the battlefield to really just share, because they are the ones who understand what you're going through the most, actually. So, and many of them have said, you know, I go home and my spouse just they don't get it.
Right.
They don't see what I see. And I try, but then I also want to care for them and not put too much on them.
Right.
And so oftentimes the best thing is to grieve together with the people on the front line with you and be able to have those moments, make sure those moments are embedded in your day for you to use the restroom, eat and drink more than coffee, but
Unfortunately, not always.
but to really take time to talk and be heard in the space with the people that care with you.
Pastor Ben, who's 38, writes this question. Sometimes individuals who struggle with mental illness feel that if they have enough faith, they will be okay. This leads them to deny the role of psychiatric medicine. What can be done to help individuals with this type of thinking?
I think I run into this a lot, and the kind of the conversation that I like to have with people when they are struggling with this is I talk about just physical health in general, and I would, just ask them and just be curious, if you went to your doctor and your doctor told you that, you were in the initial stages of diabetes, that you need to start taking insulin and your pancreas is not producing insulin anymore, would you be comfortable with pursuing that? And most of the time, 99% of the time, people are like, oh, well, of course I would do that. And I said, okay, so I think people of faith, we understand we live in a fallen world and our bodies are subject to that fall. And so these things happen. And God has so graciously provided these tools through doctors and medications and whatnot. And we're totally comfortable. But then the moment that there's an issue above the neck, somehow the head was not involved in the fall.
Wow.
And so, let's talk about what is it that's the difference for you? And I like to just explore it. I don't come to the table with like, you need to think this or whatever, but I'm just really curious to sort of unpack, okay, how did we get here to this place where the moment there's something going on with the brain and the brain is maybe not processing neurotransmitters properly, or something is not firing the way that it should, we somehow feel, okay, God's gifts that he's provided through medication and medical care are not available to us. And that's kind of where I go with it. I just stay curious with the person to explore. Tell me more about that,
That's a great strategy.
Typically the person sort of talks themselves into this place of going, wait a minute,
Yeah.
this doesn't actually quite make sense, and I'm so very sensitive because in areas of faith, I really, really want to respect the person's conviction that whatever God is speaking to them. And so to me, this is a conversation that they need to have with the Lord, but I'm going to maybe provide, an air of curiosity to sort of like, put the conversation in a certain direction.
But I think as clergy, we also need to do a better job to engage that conversation with parishioners. And really, I love that there's a therapist that works on staff. And I think that should happen way more in many more churches, and really engage our parishioners in that conversation and really encourage them to take advantage of that resource. And I think sometimes, we may, as clergy, we're used to being a lot to the parishioner, and we have to recognize our own limitations and really stay within our boundaries and be able to know that it is just as much as it's good to encourage with Scripture, it's equally as valuable to refer to a specialist.
Imagine that.
And for them to get help.
That's beautiful.
From the pastoral perspective, the biggest gift that I think a pastoral team can give their congregation is to somehow begin the process of reversing the stigma that has been around, that basically the belief that somehow if you're a diabetic, there's no problem with seeking medical help. If you have a heart murmur, of course you're going to go to a cardiologist. But, oh my goodness, if you should have an emotional difficulty, then that must mean that you're not believing hard enough or praying hard enough, or that somehow your identity as a Christian is involved in that. And so the re-education that has to happen in our churches, that basically explains, Andrea, what you just said, in that, wait, God made us whole beings. And in making us whole beings, he started providing for our psychological needs right from the Garden of Eden. Why would we serve a God that would want us to ignore it?
Well said. Our next question comes from a student, 12-year-old Claudia, and she writes this way: can school and being a student cause mental instability like anxiety, depression, or low self-esteem? What can we do when I feel like this, or when we see our friends struggling?
So I would say to this student, life is a series of, from the time that you're born, all throughout, while you are alive in this world, learning how to figure out how to handle various stressors. School, in and of itself, is a place where a certain amount of stress is placed on children, on teachers, because when you are in a school setting, you are asked to challenge yourself, to learn, and learning takes risks. You have to risk something in order to gain something. So a certain amount of that, under normal circumstances, places you in a situation where it can be stressful. It can be stressful to take risks, especially in front of others. And if you're a teenager, you're asked to sometimes make yourself vulnerable in the presence of some people that you might feel that being vulnerable is not okay. So she's right on it when she's asking this question. But on the flip side of the coin is, if you are willing to take those risks, it helps you to learn how to manage those stressors, because those stressors, even though during this COVID-19, they have come at us like full galloping horses, and it's the speed at which those stressors have come upon us that has made it to where some people are, can't take the amount of stressors. But under normal circumstances, life, it's an ongoing learning process of how to manage stress and enjoy yourself in the process, because you've got to have fun and you've got to have all these other things that make you feel like what you are engaging in is worthwhile.
Myra, you just helped me understand it. I go back to Jurassic Park when they're when all these beasties are running across the field and they duck under the log. Yes. There it is. Finally nailed it.
That's an image that's going to stay.
Oh dear.
That's the image.
That's not quite what I had in mind.
Right?
No, but the horses took us there.
But I would say to that student that when you are stressed, the biggest thing that you can do is talk to somebody, because in and of itself, keeping it to yourself makes you feel like you can't handle it.
Thank you for that.
And it makes everyone think that you're doing okay, because you're putting on this veneer, but there is no cathartic or emotional release. So the biggest thing is to have a listening ear. And if you think that someone is just totally overwhelmed, point them to where they can talk with somebody that knows more than you do of how to help them.
Imagine that, because that just leads up to our very next question.
Yeah.
It is amazing the timing on that one, because 51-year-old pastor named Gary asks this: some studies indicate that a higher percentage of people sought help for medical disorders from clergy rather than psychiatrists or medical doctors. How do we equip our leaders and clergy to respond to the mental health needs of the church, especially in the Black community?
One of the things that is an earmark of a great therapist is that they know what's in their toolbox and what's not. And they know when they can no longer help a client, or they are unable to help a client because they don't have that knowledge or that skill. And none of us can be all things to all people. No one can. I can't. Every client that walks through my door is not a guarantee that I'm going to have what I need to help them. And I'm going to need to refer them to someone that I know has those skills, that I trust. So in answer to this pastor, it seems to me that it would be very helpful to get to know the counselors in his community and to know what their skill sets are. To ask them, how comfortable are you talking to a client that wants faith-based talk? Because he may be a faith-based person and may be able to integrate that into the therapy that he's offering, or they may say, I'm not comfortable talking about that. And then you'll know, okay, I'm going to go this way instead of that way. So the best way that, in my mind, to equip yourself and to equip other pastors is to train them to know what their limitations are, to know when it's past that toolbox. Okay, I don't have that tool, so I need to find someone who does. And I have this list of people that I've vetted and I trust, and I think maybe you should try this person and see if they're a good fit for you.
Excellent.
In the Black community especially, this is a passion for me, the multicultural competence and being sensitive to the impacts of culture, it's a little bit extra difficult because traditionally in the Black community, this idea of reaching outside the church is not difficult. Been a thing. That's just not how we function. My background is Caribbean, so I have a slightly different flavor of that, but I have such a commonality with that same sort of vibe. So for pastors, it's opening up the conversation, like you were saying earlier, of just even talking about that this is a thing, and that, you know, we as a community need to start taking better care of ourselves, and here's what that can look like, and setting the example, maybe as the pastor, even talking about how you yourself are having, you know, finding your own care, bringing counselors into the fold to perhaps train the staff, you know, on how to recognize that it's time to perhaps refer that person. You know, I've gone and done some trainings with different ministries where, you know, I can teach them, okay, here's what you need to look for. And if this is happening, then you may need to consider expanding your network. You know, getting to know counselors that can understand culturally how to work with your parishioners, and faith-based, of course, you know, understand kind of like the theology that's important to your community. Those are things that pastors can really begin to do. But I think it goes back to kind of what you are saying a lot of times is, you know, taking care of yourself. Are you as the pastor okay?
And I think there comes a time it's really important for us to recognize that everybody has the freedom of choice. And so even if you have someone in your church that you want to help, if they choose not to go the path that you've laid before them, and you know you can go no further, then being straight up and saying, I'm sorry, I cannot help you any further. There is nothing more that I can do.
Courage to say that, right?
Yeah.
Tim,
Yes,
I
Tim.
think,
But that's part of self-care.
Exactly.
I think the word, we used it once or twice. I think we need to bring it up again. I think it is one of the important things pastors and the church can do is really take this stigma head on. Your comment about the diabetes, if you think many people go to a physician when they're not ill. It's called the annual physical exam. A lot of companies require it. You're not going to that physician because you're sick right there. You're going because you recognize that they have knowledge to help you get ahead of some things. And I think there's no stigma about that at all.
Right.
Nobody thinks, oh my goodness, I could be sick or I could have a problem. But if the reality is every one of us are sinners, and every one of us are broken, and every one of us have wounds if we take a breath. And so the reality is every one of us could benefit from sitting down to an open ear that has the ability to help us think differently about our own condition. But that is a huge leap for some of us because we've grown up in a church, a very traditional church that gets nervous about that because we might hear something or think something that is out of our box. You may have to take this out of the program.
No, don't.
Or it might be used in a way might be used against us.
I think this is we've got to address the stigma because along with it comes the stigma of fear. We're afraid of anything outside our gates. As if God would not provide anything good outside our gates. And the reality is you can look through the Bible from stem to stern and you will find how God uses the most unique situations to minister and put salve on wounds. The Bible is so clear that every part of us is connected, and that's the mind as well, as you pointed out so well. So I think we as a church, if there's anything out of this pandemic that we ought to come to grips with, is as a church preach about mental health and wellness as a spiritual aspect of getting help, becoming more spiritually solid by dealing with some of the humanity that comes through all of our brain and emotional being.
Some of the things that I think that we can do, number one, is help our people in the Black community understand that it's okay to be weak. So much of our experience, so much of our legacy has included being strong. They're very similar to my cancer patients. That's the biggest thing that I'll often have to address. I got to be strong. I got to be strong. I got to be strong because even especially all around cancer, it's always this fight language, right? We got to fight. And I have to go in there and help them learn to be weak because they won't last. It's a long, drawn out, extended process. They won't last if they're just always thinking they have to be strong. And helping my people in the Black community understand that it is okay to be weak. You don't have to always have got it, like I got it, or handle it. And to really say, hey, there's a space for you to be weak. It's completely appropriate. It's completely normal. It's completely okay. And here are people who help weak people.
and weak people, and that's not a negative thing.
No.
Because even the Bible says, when you're weak, I'm strong, or my strength is made perfect in weakness. And sometimes we don't even let, just from a spiritual perspective, we don't even let God be strong because we're so busy trying to be strong. And so can we just kind of stop the presses and say, it is okay that I can't handle everything.
All the time.
All the time. It is okay if you know, I'm down. There's a flood of support for people like me. And I think that would be, if we can help even from a clergy standpoint, help our people understand that to be weak is the perfect opportunity for your community and God to be strong.
Christian, that's profound.
That is.
To suggest that our strength comes through our vulnerability. Appropriate vulnerability. I might qualify that a little bit. But it's beautiful to help someone recognize that I don't have to be strong to win. I can actually be open to win and teachable, maybe even.
And oftentimes we think everything is just going to fall apart if we we do that.
If I surrender.
And there's some evidence for that, unfortunately.
Definitely,
so we have to reckon with those
we have
realities.
to have that social support also to come along with that. That's why clergy has to be a part of helping to bring in those resources that can be there to help support.
One of the more challenging questions that our audience participants wrote in comes from Elizabeth, church member, 65 years old. She says, I am very concerned by the statistics of suicide, and I'm discouraged by stories I have heard of cases, even in my own church. What leads a person to the breaking point, and what can we do to prevent it?
I know in our neighborhood, we've had 2 suicides. And that was something I struggled with personally for the majority of my life till my late 20s. And it's a dark place. I think you mentioned it's the hopeless, it's the powerless, it's feeling like nothing is going to change. I have nothing to kind of grab onto, so I need an exit. I know for me, it was like feeling like I was the only kid in school who felt this way. And now as a counselor, I'm like, man, that was so not true, But engage the conversation. Wow. Again, you mentioned it a bit ago. Presence. Please, please, please take care of yourself. Your presence. Look, you're not going to necessarily talk somebody out of feeling that, but just your presence may be the one thing that they can hang on to where they're like, man, I don't feel like being here, but that dude Christian, man, he looked at me in the eye. I knew he cared. And that could be the one thing, man, that you talk about seeds, that could be the one seed that matters. And it's just a cumulative effect of things that happen. And to the horses, the Jurassic Park, everything coming at us, it's too much. And people feel, there's nothing else for me to do here but to end my own life, because I can't even see myself trying to stand back up and get mulled over again by those dinosaurs.
Wow.
So when you get to that point, the biggest thing is that you stop thinking straight. You stop thinking logically. And the fact that you're no longer thinking logically because you're in this dark emotional place is what then spurs people to do the biggest thing, because we've had some of these situations that have happened even recently as the end of last school year. We had a child that took her own life, and looking at these situations, the teacher said school was her safe place. The thing that I share with children is that when someone gets to that point, they are not thinking straight, and they want to try to put an end to what the pain that they're feeling emotionally, and they unfortunately try to put an end, a permanent end to a temporary problem.
I've always read and heard that, and in my own experience, there's very few people that when that terrible situation happens, people around them don't say,
What could I?
I could see that. I mean, in hindsight,
Yes.
you saw the signs. You just may not have recognized them going forwards. But when you look back, I mean, they were there. And to your point, I guess the realization is, if we're human, we're capable of slipping into that dark spot. I mean, nobody is totally out of that. So if that's the case, then we ought to look for those opportunities to encourage and connect. It's very easy to say it. It's not in our busy lives. You guys talked about our busy lives. It's easy to miss things going forward that we are clearly seeing in the hindsight, which leaves people very discouraged too.
Where do you see hope during this pandemic? And please feel free to mention resources that you might be aware of. Talk to us about where you see maybe God leading, or where people are responding in such positive ways. And we're going to go through this with deep wounds and scars that will be with us a long time. But I have some confidence that people will rally and find hope together. I wonder if you could speak to that.
I think, spiritually speaking, we're talking about weakness, showing weakness, being just honest and real. I think for me, what I've seen, and I do a lot of like what we call reparenting, but it's understanding that, and I feel like we've lost this at times in the church where it's, and I know obviously there's a Trinity, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and then God the Father. It's like really getting people to realize you are His beloved son, you are His beloved daughter, and really understanding what does that mean again. I'm allowed to be weak, because if I'm struggling as a son and I have a healthy dad, like the ultimate dad, it's like he says, he's not going to give me a snake when I ask him for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's understanding it's okay. Let God pour into you. When's the last time, we get so caught in wanting to read all our scriptures and do our things. When's the last time you invited him to go for a walk? Or when you're doing construction on your home, you ask him to help you build. That's what a dad comes in for. And for me, it's been so awesome seeing people recognize there's a hole in the pit here I didn't know existed. It was possible for me. But I'm realizing now this new relational aspect of engaging God the Father, that my dad actually wants to be there to help me up and pour into me. And I think for me, on just a strictly clinical, functional level, the hope here is that it's become more normalized, and also it's become more open, because now people don't have to drive 35 minutes in Orlando traffic to come to an hour appointment, then drive 30. An hour appointment turns into 2.5 hour adventure. And it's like, wow, you can come get help. And you can, set your computer up or your phone or whatever in your own bedroom or your own back patio. And it's so portable. Or you could be on vacation and still stay. And it makes things so available schedule-wise, especially if you've got 2-3 kids. That time is precious. It's weight in gold. So that's what I would say.
Good. Thank you.
I was going to say, one of the things that I promote to our schools is know your local resources. And because we probably are aware of some resources here in the Orlando area, but Florida's a big place. So in each area, I would say that every school principal, teachers, pastors need to be very aware of what are some faith-based individuals that have the set of mental health skills that can help a person through a tough situation. And that's going to be different resources in different communities, but every community does have them, for the most part. You might have to travel a little bit more, but as you said, traveling nowadays is a relative thing. It can be as far away as your computer. So the resources are there. From the conference's perspective, I am a resource to every teacher and every school. And not just in our system, but in other systems as well.
Beautiful.
and I'm only a phone call away to reach out through Florida Conference. I think every one of us have colleagues and so forth that we know what their special areas are. And so even if you only know one person, that one person can give you a link to, network to a lot of other scenarios. But the good news is that we have gone through this collective thing together, and that we will also come out of it together.
Indeed.
We just have to be able to lock hands and support each other in the process as we inch our way there.
Tim, what brings hope for me is the church is talking about this in a context like this. Because I'm old, and I can remember a time that we probably wouldn't be openly talking about this, and it would become more of a faith issue. And I think what we're recognizing is a life issue. And the church is there to help bring God into people's lives and heal wounds, and these are all part of wounds. And we've gone through a major wound together, and we'll come out of it together. We'll heal together, but the church can play a role, and the church shouldn't be lagging government and all other areas where they're bringing focus and resource. This has pulled the curtain back on something that's been around for a long time, people struggling with mental illness and behavioral issues, and now people are beginning to take it more seriously. And I think for the church to step up and be a leader in that, not a laggard, is a very hopeful thing for me.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's awesome. I think for me, it's been really a blessing and really fulfilling to see people coming to counseling because the water has revealed, a whole lot of things that they were, happily ignoring before. But now it's invited this process. And of course, we have to sort of mediate it with the level of stress that they're dealing with. But I'm seeing people digging in and addressing deep, lifelong family of origin, all kinds of deeper issues that they had been sort of like, ignoring for a number of years. But because of this collective shenanigans that we've been in, they can't ignore it anymore. And so it's become this really amazing opportunity to tackle some things that were there the whole time.
Exactly.
And so now when I think about what their lives are going to look like on the other side of this thing, it's so exciting to me to really see how something that's so challenging and it's been so hard.
God promises
for so
to
many
take
people.
every situation
Exactly.
that is bad
Exactly.
and somehow turn it
there's-
around for the good.
And each of them are embedded within families and communities that are going to be impacted by their work.
Yes.
And so it's not just this person that I'm working with, but it's everyone attached to them is going to benefit from the work that they're
Perhaps
doing.
it's
So
cliche, but
that's awesome.
God doesn't waste tragedy, right?
Nothing's wasted in God's economy.
Yeah, beautiful. Christian, I wonder if you have some pointers to rays of hope or resources, either one.
Yeah, I believe that the gospel is about healing. Honestly, I believe the gospel is about healing, and it's not just a cute cat phrase to say Jesus loves me or loves you or something like that. It's really healing, and I believe that about healthcare. Honestly, I've said this a few times, but I believe the fullest aim of healthcare is when the medicine reaches the soul, and we have to find the vein that leads to the soul, and be able to really let flow in those very pure, awesome principles that come from the gospel, and that is grace, forgiveness, hope, all those different things. And so I believe, as Tim kind of said, we have a huge opportunity within this pandemic, and as we grow from it, to really, as a church, as Christians, as believers, to be people of healing to those that are struggling mentally, physically, spiritually as well. And then how can our efforts reach their soul? That's our goal.
Beautiful. Candy, can you talk to us?
So when you asked this question, it's like Ricochet Rabbit in my head. It went ping, 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 because there's so many things I want to share. So many things I want to share. I went through a personal experience right before the pandemic. that taught me the value of recognizing that, and I mentioned it at the very beginning, so I'm going to end with it, that my happiness is not dependent on my circumstances. And the pandemic has just solidified that in my mind. My happiness is not dependent on my circumstances. And one of the best tools, this is the resource that I'm going to offer, and of course, you see 3 private practice counselors right here that are resources, and these people are resources in their fields. So there are resources you're going to have available. But the one I want to share is recognition of gratitude. You know, the Lord promises us that our mercies are new every morning, and that's at least 2. That's plural. That's at least 2. And so spending our day looking for what those mercies are, focusing on the things that we can be grateful for during this time, it repositions our thinking to bring us around to where we can be happy no matter what our circumstances are, because we are focusing on those things that put us in that right frame of mind, that frame of mind of looking for the beauty, looking for the collateral beauty, the beauty we don't expect that came out of it. And we go, wow, that never would have happened if the pandemic had not taken place. And recognizing that those mercies come from God. So he's ever present and ever integrated no matter the circumstances. So that is the resource that I would offer, is to looking with gratitude to recognize where the blessings are.
Beautiful, beautiful.